Hey guys, another video for the Buying a House in Japan playlist. Some of you might remember the front of the old farmhouse. Since you saw it last, that metal roof has really started to deteriorate from rust, and the gutter at the top and the bottom have become absolutely useless. As you can see, that's just a waterfall when it rains. The gutter's useless and that roof is really deteriorating. So it's the front of the house, of course, so we see it all the time, and every time there's a bit of wind or a bit of rain, little rusty bits of metal fall off the roof and onto the ground and leave little rusty stains on the concrete. So it's constant reminders that this thing is deteriorating. And of course the worry is, if it deteriorates enough, the water will start to get into the wood underneath, and then you have to replace the whole thing. So we knew it was going to be a horrible job, but as always with the farmhouse, we tried to stay on top of things so that the repairs don't get too expensive. So it's always a bit of a weighing it up thing. We don't want to spend money on the place because obviously 10 years time, chances are it'll be sold and someone else will just knock it down, because old places like this aren't appreciated at all in Japan. They just want the land. So any money we put into it is sort of thrown away, really. So the way we see it is spend the minimum amount possible to maintain it and stop it deteriorating further, and also to keep it a nice place to live too. Of course, if it starts to deteriorate too badly, it becomes unpleasant. And this is the front of the house, so the goal is to repair it without spending too much money and do it well enough that it'll last. Again, the goal's always 10 years. If we can get 10 years out of anything we do, we're happy. So if we can get 10 years out of the work that we do here, but without spending too much money. So the unskilled labourer is onto it because he costs nothing. So he lacks in skill, but the benefit is he's cheap. And then it's just the materials. So we knew this was going to be a monster because the roof we did at the side, they're the brackets that were holding the gutter on, and that's one of the good ones. The bad ones had actually rusted right away and just given up, which is why that gutter was hanging off. So that was the first step, was to pull that gutter off and take the brackets off, and the nails that are holding them on. So we knew this was going to be a bad job. We've been putting it off and putting it off, but it just had to be done. Couldn't be put off anymore. So off with the gutter, off with the brackets. Had to be done first, as it'll become obvious soon. You'll see why. It's just to get where the back of the roof is, the gutter was sort of in the way. So it was a pretty harsh job for the old man, because everything was either on the knees or on the back. So it had to either be on the knees working or lying on the back working, as you'll see. So it was pretty harsh on the body. And the sort of the fantasy was at the beginning that we could whip the roof off and do the repairs that needed to be done and put the new roof on and maybe get it done in a week. But as you'll see, it didn't go like that, and it actually took about 3 weeks. So not all day, every day, of course, just any time that the unskilled labourer wasn't at his real job, he was working on this. So it's probably, man hours was probably about, could have been 60, 70 hours. So this is the problem. The back of it, there's a few problems, but one of the big ones was that the sheeting goes underneath that flashing, and they'd actually laid the sheeting down, nailed it down, and then they nailed the flashing down and nailed the flashing to the upright posts, and then they put that wall over the top. And we knew that'd be the case because that was the case with the other wall around the side. So we want to take the roof off, but we don't want to take the wall off, because obviously that's 10 meters of wall there. We don't want to take the sheeting off that. So it was really difficult to work it out. And you don't know till you start pulling. We had a bit of a plan, but of course, till you start pulling these things apart, you don't know what you're going to find. So we're sort of baffled. That bit at the back where it joins the wall was really baffling. No idea. We had no idea how to deal with that. So interesting strategy. If you've got a job like this, a big job like this, what we've noticed is if you've got a big job to do and you get started on it and then you're not quite sure how to do some part of it, it seems to be a good strategy just to leave that and keep going with something else. And I mean, the rest of the roof had 1 million nails in it that needed to be removed. And the lower part of the roof, the front of the roof, was fairly straightforward. It was just required a lot of patience and a lot of removing of nails. So that was what we did. Just kept going, got into it and just kept going and plodding along and did other stuff. And that does seem to be a good strategy because it leaves you time to think about it then and try and think of different ways to deal with it. So as you can see, that front part's more accessible. It's the back bit that was the mystery. Just that one big nail under the flashing. There's one big nail and a couple little ones on each piece. On each piece, that raised bit, the wooden bit. Those wooden bits you can see, each of those had a series of big long nails. And the ones out here in the open are easy to get to, but the ones underneath the flashing, there was just no way to get them off, no way to lever them off. Down here was okay, we could do all that, that was easy, lever them off and get the big nails out. But up there underneath that wall, that was the tricky bit. In there. So again, just leaving it, getting on with some other work and just leaving it. Obviously, in the back of your mind and thinking about it and looking at it. Contemplating taking that whole wall off. Really didn't want to take that whole wall off. 10 meters of it. Really didn't want to do that. Just that'd be a huge job. And it's just throwing away money and man hours, you know. And then accidentally cracked underneath this sheeting is some really thin wood. Accidentally cracked some. You can see there trying to lever up one of those pieces of wood. And then thought, wait a moment, if we cut holes up from underneath those pieces of wood, we might be able to get a grinder onto the big nails. So I got the power saw onto it, worked out where each of those pieces of wood were, and made, how many? About 12, 15 holes from underneath. And then could see the nail, and then had to actually go and get a bigger blade, a bigger wheel for the grinder, because it was just a bit too far back for the little wheel we had. Got a big wheel for the grinder, and then used that to cut through the big nail from underneath. And then once that big nail was cut through, that meant that we could remove the piece of wood. Still had to lie down up the top there and get a few smaller nails out with the crowbar, but the big one that was the problem was gone. That solved that. So I had to make all these holes all the way across. Got out of hand, this job. Taking that roof off, in the fantasy that taking that roof off was going to take a day, and it took a week, 3 or 4 hours a day for a week. And it was just a horrible job. Did we mention that already? Horrible job. It took little bit of time to work out a bit of a system here, how to lever up that. Didn't want to damage that flashing because, again, hadn't quite worked out how this was going to go down at the end with the flashing, but we knew that we wanted to keep that flashing in good condition, didn't want to damage it, so I had to try and lift the flashing up to pull out the smaller nails and then get the sheets out and get those pieces of wood out. So it took a little bit of time to sort of work out a bit of a system there, a bit of a system to do it. And then as it sort of worked out the system, then things started to roll, and out came the pieces of wood, out came the sheets. And I had to be really careful then, because that wood that's underneath those metal sheets, that wood's really thin and really weak. And there's only where the beams are that's strong enough. Those beams you can see there are strong enough to take the 100 kilo that the old man weighs. So those beams are the only safe place to be, really, once the sheets came off. So had to be really careful. Just took forever. It just went on and on and on, this job. So I left that gutter, see the front gutter closest to us there, sits full of rust, full of rusty metal. So left that right till the end, because all that rusty metal, every time one of these sheets got moved, big pieces of rusty metal fell off. So to sort of make the job, keep the front of the house a bit tidier and not drop too much rusty metal on the ground, just left that gutter till the end. And see the right, see the big roof there that you can see, and then to the right there's a roof really close to us there that goes off in a different 90 degrees. So there's an L-shape tiled roof, and the one on our right hand side here is lower, and it's actually 1 centimetre higher than the roof that we're taking off. And the roof that we're removing actually goes underneath this tiled one. So again, lots of mysteries with a job like this. You don't know what's going to happen. So as we got closer to this end, it was like, what's going to happen there? Because there was a sheet underneath that roof, and the fear was that if it was full of nails, it was really going to be tricky to get to. And again, probably have to go at it from underneath, but would have been really big job. Take everything off underneath to get to it, and that would have been a horrible job. So there was a bit of sort of, oh, not sure how that's going to go as it got closer. It's a ridiculous roofing system, that. Pain in the neck to remove, but it must have been equally painful to, not equally painful, but it must have also been painful to put it up. Ridiculous system. Hard to know why you'd bother with all that. In fairness though, it was a really old roof, and it was still in pretty good condition except the rust. It had lasted really well for a really long time, so in fairness, it was pretty good. It still wasn't leaking. With all that rust, the rust was falling off all over the place, but the water wasn't really getting into the wood. Just a couple of places it was a little bit damp, but it'd hold up to the rain. So right up to that roof now, getting as close to it as possible, pulling out as many nails as possible. Yeah, that last sheet, really didn't want to touch that wall, but the last sheet of that wall was really bad, so it had to be replaced, had to be pulled off. And then time to take the gutter down. And it was full, it was really heavy, really full of rusty metal. And then that last sheet, there was 1 centimetre between that sheet and the roof above it, and that was a real worry, but we actually got that out, which was a real relief. It was like, oh, good one, because that was looking like a horrible job, so it was really good to get that sheet out. Had no idea at this stage how to replace it, what to put in there, how to get it in, because it was just so tight. And there was one big nasty nail about just out of arm's reach that you couldn't get to. There was no way to get to it, no way to remove it, just a nasty nail sticking down from above, big sharp one. So this is painting. All the exposed wood at the front here, wanted that painted. It was all in good condition. That metal had protected it. It was all in good condition, so just had to hammer in a few nails that had come loose and paint it all up to protect it. And these brackets that were supporting the gutter, as you can see, really good condition. So just had a wire brush wheel on a battery drill and just wire brushed them up just to get any sort of surface rust off them, and then painted them. So that was good, didn't have to do them. And then just had to do that wall. You can see the mud in there behind there. There was less than a metre that had to be replaced, and it was a horrible, horrible job, and just proved that replacing the whole 10 metres of it was not worth it, because it was just a horrible job lying underneath that eave. So I went back to the storehouse at the back, storeroom at the back, where we keep all our materials. We keep all bits of wood and metal and plumbing and pipes and stuff, and found a sheet of corrugated iron left over from another job that fitted, that we could cut down to fit to that piece that needed replacing. And then just lying there with trying to hammer in nails like that. It's just a horrible job. Trying to hammer in nails with any sort of force lying like that's really tricky, obviously. Hammering in the nails and then painting it. Not a very flattering angle, is it? Sorry about that. Horrible. Good weather, but it did get pretty hot up there on that roof too, as you can imagine. So for a few reasons, the plan was to put down some 4mm ply, so really thin ply. There's a lot of nail heads through all that wood that you can see. There's lots of nail heads that we didn't want scratching the new corrugated iron roof. So the plan was to put down this ply, marking the lines, those lines on the ply mark where the beam is underneath, so we know where we can put in a nail. And then we just put the ply in place with just 2 little screws. So the idea was that we'd end up with a surface that didn't have any nail heads in it and was reasonably flat. The roof's a bit uneven, but with that ply made it a bit more even. It also meant it's safer for the old guy to move around without falling through, because as you'll see, there's a lot more work to do up there. So it made a better surface to work on, and the end result from underneath will look neater too. When you look up from underneath all those holes that we made, obviously it's going to look a lot neater if it's got that ply down. And then now it's time to paint underneath the tile at the front there. So where the wood that supports the roof and the wood that the brackets for the gutter go onto are exposed and probably never painted. That's usually the case with the way Japanese houses like this are made. So painting all that to protect it against the weather. By the way, can you see the 2 wooden posts that look a bit odd on just underneath where the big guy is now? They're a little bit of extra support, temporary support, just to take the weight a bit. All hands and knees, isn't it, guys? This whole job, hands and knees and back it was. Did I mention it was a horrible job? So, never put the unskilled labourer has got no experience putting gutters up, none at all. So put a bracket on the low end where the water's going to drain to, and put that bracket as low as possible, and then put a bracket up the other end as high as possible, and then tied a string between them, thinking that if we line the brackets up with that string, that should put a slope on the gutter, shouldn't it? And then got this little spirit level with the intention of keeping the front of the gutter and the back of the gutter level, because if it wasn't level, the water would fall out the back of the gutter or the front, wouldn't it? We need the back of the gutter and the front of the gutter to be level, but we need the thing to slope from right to left, don't we? So that was the thinking anyway. So tried that. That was a painful job as well, lying underneath that eave, trying to screw those brackets into place, holding the bracket and the spirit level with one hand and the battery drill with screws with the other hand, because we didn't want to be nailing on that old wood. So I put big 45mm screws in instead. That worked pretty well. But geez, that was a job too. That was a job to do on your back, all the blood draining out of your arms. So managed to get a sheet up underneath that roof up there, underneath the tiled roof. That was tricky, and tore it. It got torn on the big nail that was sticking down, but managed to put a second sheet in over the top of it, so it overlapped, and then put about an 8mm piece of wood underneath the flashing, and then put the corrugate on top of that, and then put a bunch of silicone on top of the sheeting, and then put the flashing down with a nail the flashing down on top. So that should last. We should get 10 years out of that. That's pretty watertight and pretty solid. And then lots of nails, every 3 ridges a nail. So that sheeting is 1/2 mil thick. It's really thin, and because that's the thing too, we can't go back over the top of it, so slowly working back this way, but can't go back on top of it, so I have to do a really good job and do all that siliconing and nailing of the flashing as we go. And that's the standard here. If you go to the building supply places, 1/2 mil, and then your choice is galvanized iron that you have to paint, which is what we used on the other roof that we did, or this stuff that's pre-painted, but it's still only 1/2 mil thick. It's pretty thin. But we know a guy that's put this on a roof that's in a similar location to this, and he's had 15 years from it, and it's been pretty good, so we should be able to get our 10 out of it without any trouble. So slowly working back this way. The roof isn't perfectly flat. It's sort of wavy. It's old. It's really old. You just have to accept it with jobs like this, that with these old houses, you're never going to make everything perfect, because nothing is square and nothing is flat, nothing is level. But you just have to sort of do the best you can and try and make the result as good as possible. Geez, it was a job. What a job. Just couldn't get comfortable. There's no way to get comfortable, leaning out across there, nailing in the nails, then lying underneath the eave and putting down the silicone and reaching out and trying to hammer in nails with nowhere to swing the hammer. What a job. So we're right up to the other end. Yay. And there's this tricky bit. This goes underneath another roof as well. So the front end's okay, that's fairly straightforward, but this top end goes underneath another roof and there's bits of wood in there and the flashing comes to an end and some other flashing comes along and it was really complicated, and we're trying to work out ways. It had a whole heap of pieces of metal on it originally, and we thought we had to do the same thing, and then just on a whim slid a sheet up there to see how it would go, and it just fitted. It went between all the dodgy bits. There was bits of wood up there and bits of flashing, and it slipped in between them all and ended up covering the whole lot with the sheet, which was just a miracle because it looked like it was going to be a horrible job with all sorts of flashing required and all sorts of faffing, and that sheet slid into place, nailed it down, and it was finished. It was just a miracle. So that's the sheeting done. So now I need to do the guttering and then paint underneath. So you can see that ply covered those holes evenly, because if we hadn't done that you would have seen the corrugate from underneath, wouldn't you? It would have looked dodgy, wouldn't it? So that sort of gives it a flat sort of surface from underneath. Again, it's old, it's never going to look new, but we want to make it look okay. So we had that miracle happen with that corrugate, that last sheet of corrugate going into place that we didn't think would go in. So that was a good thing. However, not all jobs go like that, right? So we've got this old piece of downpipe that had been up there before, and it was still in good nick, but it looked dodgy. So the plan was just to paint it, and it was a nice big pipe, and we thought with all the water coming off the roof, to have a big downpipe would probably be a good idea. But there was just no way. This was such a job. At this point, if we had audio, you'd hear the unskilled labourer saying, "Oh my goodness me." I'm very surprised and disappointed that this doesn't seem to go together. And this plastic, actually the guttering's all made by Panasonic, and it's all made to clip together, and you still have to glue it, you still have to bond it together, but it all clips together, and that catching thing, whatever you call that thing that catches the water at the top, just would not go on that gutter. And it was supposed to be the same size, but it's just not going to go. And whether it's just because it's an old design or something, but there was you see the old guy there, he's going, "Oh my goodness, I'm very disappointed," as you can imagine. So it just failed. That plan just failed. Just ended up throwing that old piece away and going back to the home center and getting new stuff. Another $30. So here's what the underside looked like after being painted. So yeah, total job probably about $300 or $400 probably in the end. So it looks better, doesn't it? Painted up, nice and even. And here's the new downpipe. So there's the downpipes done. So that's the guttering finished as well. So that means it's time for a before and after, doesn't it? So here's the before. Dodgy old gutters and our rusty old roof. Front of the house, we saw that every time we came home. And here's what it looks like now. 3 weeks and about $400 later. But it's good. Now we don't have bits of rust falling on the ground, and it looks better, doesn't it? Looks a bit better. Anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.